My name's Jess Curley. I'm with Supreme, and it's my pleasure to introduce the next part of the program, David Calhoun, who is Chief Executive Officer of Nielsen, well-known company for audience measurement systems. We all know of this company and have heard of it for many years. One of the interesting things to me when I was looking at this morning, I decided to look and see, particularly in TV programs, it's always interesting to me to see which TV programs over the years have been number one or at the top. And I was looking at that this morning, and going back to my generation, most of you cannot remember some of these shows, but I certainly can. Look in there and I see shows like Gunsmoke. There's a few in here, I guess, that are still at that generation. I'm surprised Honeymooners wasn't on there. That was one of my favorites, but Jackie Gleason wasn't on there. But I Love Lucy, kind of so-so. Wagon Train, and the Beverly Hillbillies. I never could figure that one out. All in the Family, 60 Minutes, Seinfeld, and today, another one I can't quite figure out, but American Idol is up there. So anyway, these are companies and that we all know and certainly have great reputations. And but it's my pleasure again to introduce David Calhoun, because before joining Nielsen, David was also with a small little company. He joined Nielsen in 2002, but before that time, he was had an extensive and distinguished career with General Electric. He held a number of executive positions with General Electric. In his last position there at GE was Vice Chairman and President and CEO of GE's Infrastructure, which is the largest of their 6 business units. And looking at the numbers of under his leadership, $47 million of revenue, I'm talking $1 billion, did I say $1 million? $1 billion of revenue and $9 billion of profit. That's again, billion with a B. David is a native of Philadelphia, but he's a graduate of Virginia Tech, so he's a Hokie. He's also has been involved with other organizations. He's on the board of directors of the Caterpillar Company, Metrotronics, and the Boeing Company. And seeing the Boeing Company, that he's a director of the Boeing, just reminded me of when I put GE and Boeing together, of one of the best commercials that I've seen in a number of years. If any of you have seen it, I'm sure you have, of the GE workers, and it shows the workers working on this huge engine for the new Dreamliner, and shows all these different shots of them working in this factory in the United States. And then it shows all of the workers lined out on the runway when they take the first test run of the Dreamliner, and this plane taking off with this giant GE engine. And all of the workers there have worked on that engine. You see the emotion in all of them. I thought it was a great commercial. It had to have rated very high in Nielsen. I'm sure it did. But again, Dave's topic today I think is very appropriate for us and for this meeting, the U.S. consumer, multicultural, and connected. So at this time, I'd ask Dave to come forward. Dave?
Jess, thank you. As far back as I can remember, Gossip Girls, that's about it. I happen to have 3 daughters, so now you understand why. Just a couple of comments up front about why I chose the topic, but also about a subject that probably won't get discussed in a lot of detail, but I think should be, and every time I get the opportunity to get on a stage that Terry was on, I make sure people get the perspective that I have. We're scorekeepers. Nielsen and its 2 big fundamental businesses, in measuring what people watch and then measuring what people buy. We keep score on all of the retailers and the manufacturers and the brands and how they're doing and how they're measuring up to their competition. And I'm always amazed because we do it mostly for the CPG industry, but we look around all other industries to find out who are the best of the best and why. And what is it about that leadership team that differentiates themselves? And I always follow Terry around because Terry, in his space, in that space that a lot of people for many, 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 many years would have suggested was either behind the times or going to be the dinosaur, actually has led on almost every front. And I attribute it to one very simple thing. Most leaders, when their businesses are surrounded by new technologies and threats, get afraid. And they get defensive, and they get on their heels, and that defensive posture carries throughout the company and throughout the industry. And in effect, it prevents them from playing offense with all those technologies and all those opportunities that exist. It's not that it doesn't take tons of courage to make that jump and make that leap, but in my view, Terry has totally distinguished himself, and his team have distinguished themselves on exactly that front. And as you go around and talk to retailers across the board, I still view him and his leadership team as being in the minority in accepting this technological thrust that they are all up against, this connected consumer. And I think they're having a blast with it. And I think you can tell just by the way they talk about it and the future that they're beginning to see for it. But I have to tell you, it's a big deal, and it shouldn't be lost, particularly on the students that are in this auditorium, because that makes all the difference in the world. A couple of thoughts just about Nielsen I wanted to describe up front. Again, we're a very global company. Our founders, the Nielsen family, started planting flags for measurement purposes back 50 years ago. And they have been measuring sort of retail performance in every country around the world. We're in over 100 of them. And they've been doing it, and again, we've grown up with these countries and the retail establishment for all those years, and it's been a lot of fun. The other thing that's unique about our company is we do measure two engagements. The watch engagement, so what do you interact with, the TV, the computer screen, the mobile phone, what we call the best available screen. It's sort of silly these days to actually talk about them separately. It's really the best available screen. And then what you buy. And we measure it across all forms of retail, including e-commerce, and all the dynamics that exist in going from sort of one to another, the winners, the losers, and all those things. Wasn't that long ago that the primary viewing screen, the television, that the cable companies launched on a path to, in effect, make it interactive, to provide for a return path from that set-top box that is on most folks' homes. What's very interesting to me is that day's actually long since passed. With the advent of Facebook and the advent of social networking and the simultaneous usage of devices, TV is interactive. All forms of TV are interactive. Broadcast TV is interactive. If you are on your Facebook with your friends talking about the show and or any subject while you're watching TV, you are in an interactive environment. And at the end of the day, the world has just sort of passed that phenomena by without anybody really taking notice. The second big thing that underwrites so much, and it really leads to the discussion I would like to have with all of you, is population growth. It doesn't get talked about enough, but the facts are that population growth in this generation, and for the generation of the students that are represented in this room, is going to explode in ways the world has never seen, that the planet has never seen. We all know that the population growth is occurring in places that have the least resources available to provide for that population, which means immigration is going to be one of the biggest and most important subjects that the world has to take on, governments, so forth and so on. So what's that have to do with marketers? Well, immigration is going to provide for multicultural opportunities in every country on the planet. People are going to be moving from places without resource to places with. You can't stop the phenomena. Folks will try, politicians will try, governments will try, but it can't be stopped because the dynamics around population growth are so significant. So every country, in my view, is going to deal with the multicultural phenomena, and being great marketers around multicultural differentiators, societies, the way they think, the way they behave, is a very, very big deal. Which brings me to just the United States. It's very interesting to me that when I visit with big manufacturers and brands who are thinking about their growth and the potential and so forth, that they immediately talk to us about every new country on the planet. Today, it's Africa. It's the hot subject, every single country. How are we going to get a measurement footprint? What are we going to do, et cetera? What are the unique attributes of that particular country? Talk to us about it in a cultural sense. When interestingly, in this country, I never get asked that question. We hardly ever get asked about what African Americans are doing, what Asian Americans are doing, what Hispanics are doing in this country. How are they behaving? What's different? What are the uncommon truths related to those multicultural groups? And I find that fascinating because the size and scale of these opportunities is significant. And the misalignment, in my view, of all of the various marketing activities around this group is actually significant. I'm a big believer in the alignment of retail, manufacturer or brand, and TV or media audience. If you can align those around those populations in really significant ways, you can be a great marketer. You can have great results. And my attempt in the rest of this discussion is to point out a few of the gaps that we see, which are reasonably significant, and then maybe some of the opportunities that I think ought to be seized on. The first is the subject of how do you reach these multicultural groups inside our country. Well, frankly, there are some very discrete and targeted ones in television. There are certainly in the Hispanic world. You have Univision, you have Telemundo, you have Pipes. Social networking has absolutely opened up a whole new forum for which you can reach. Again, I believe, based on the number of requests and the activities I see inside the marketing organizations of the companies we serve, that we are in the early innings on this. Because it's not usually well organized. It's actually not usually staffed in any prolific way. And the heavy hitters in the marketing space don't tend to get built around these particular groups. But in my view, those undervalued direct mediums that reach these multicultural interests are going to find themselves in a great position in the years ahead. But I do think everyone's got to pay tons of attention to it. What is it about how these groups, how is it that they work with the various, if you could move that ahead, I think I'm clicking the right button. How is it these groups use all these devices? Well, this is very interesting data, at least in my view. Hispanics are all around, African Americans are all around the telephone. All around the telephone. 1,300 minutes a month, 2x the norm, 2x the average. Asian Americans, online blogging, website visits, 3.5 times the norm. So it's a very active group on the internet, very active group in search, et cetera. And then Hispanics are built around the phone but text. The phone but text in a very significant way relative to the norm. Again, very few marketing campaigns, very few media interests, very few agency interests know how to use this data in ways to target advertising in a more specific way and a more effective way to take advantage of these things. It also implies that this crowd is very new media friendly, very new media centric. It is, mostly because of demos and youth. Mostly because of demos and youth. So it's a very new media-centric crowd. And if you were going to target them as a group, as a marketing function, you would clearly weight new media in a bigger way. So connected does not necessarily mean engaged. So even if you get there, and we launched a big study that I'm going to give you the results of here in a little bit about what it means to be engaged with folks, even if you get them on the right media. But if I were focused on the different media options to reach multiculturals, it would clearly be on the two available screens that you see here, the phone and the computer, or the iPad. We all know in the retail world, and you guys, a lot of folks in this room know this better than I do, but we all know in the retail world it's very different in terms of the way these groups shop as well. These are statistics that we keep relative to the number of trips that these groups take, and then the average spend on these trips. And you can see the significant differences here. There are also some underlying trends here that might not be so apparent. African Americans, households that make over $100,000 a year in the African American community, are 3 times more interested or prevalent or spend 3 times as much in the higher end channels. 3 times. That's a very significant number. Asian Americans, 9 out of 10 live in metro. 9 out of 10 live in metro. So if you're going to target them, that is exactly where you would go. And today, 22 of the top 100 metros are, in fact, minority-majority, or majority-minority, however you want to call it. But in effect, the minority or multicultural have the majority of the population. So again, the more local you get, and I think the strategy that Terry outlined about getting local and allowing local teams to make local decisions and build products has to incorporate some of that multicultural density, if you will. Now, here's another sort of statistic that I find amazing. So we do studies of all new product introductions into the consumer packaged goods world. We do it around the world, but we do it in a very big way here in the United States. And we went back and looked at the last 54,000 new product introductions that we tracked, helped plan for, forecast for all of these companies. And less than 1% were targeted to any one of these multicultural interests. Less than 1%, which I find fascinating. And if you look at the total advertising spend across at least the 2 big mediums, television and online, less than 1.7% was targeted on the multicultural interest, which is amazing to me that we can't be a little more targeted. In many ways, we all want to get to 1-to-1, but sometimes we miss the hand in front of our face in terms of getting to these bigger multicultural interests. So we call it a gap. I view it, all problems and gaps as opportunities. So let's talk a little bit about resonance. And resonance is, in our view, the other factor in reaching multicultural. It's one thing to reach them. It's another thing to actually have them remember anything that you might have told them. So we did a study of roughly 7,000 ads, and this was over recent history. We took those 7,000 ads and we broke them down to the top ads that index well to these multicultural interests, Asian American, African American, and Hispanic populations. And then we studied those ads for sort of what works, what doesn't work. What are the common themes that bring resonance to the message? The first set of takeaways, pretty straightforward. This is what I would call the obvious. A successful ad is, in fact, a successful ad, no matter who it goes out to. Humorous storylines always win. So humorous storylines always gain favor across all of these groups. The third one, this is a cute way of saying that just because you have characters represented in ads that represent that multicultural interest doesn't mean it has any effect on the ad at all. There's no correlation. If you have Hispanics in an ad and you're targeting Hispanics, that doesn't necessarily do a thing for you. And similarly across the other multicultural interests. So what is different? I mean, what are the unique things that these interests have? First, very high correlation in the Asian American group around product-specific feature. They're very interested in what the product does and does for them. 2 big ads on this front for the Asian American was the Droid Incredible 2, which is it's really an ad with a young woman who stands in front of a Verizon store and looks up, and they have a picture of the phone, and she describes every feature and what it will do for her in her life. The other one that was a big hit and indexed incredibly high is the Ford Focus and the Park Assist. So you back into in effect, it parks the car for you. But these were huge ads that indexed very well, but in the end, if you have great product stories and product features, it works well. African Americans, humor. Humor is clearly the one that correlated big across the board. The ad that scored biggest and correlated in the biggest and most effective way was an ad we call a Sonic ghost ad. So this is Sonic, and it's a picture of a ghost who drives up to a gas station, a terminal, eating a Sonic hot dog. A cop comes up to the window and says, "Sir, there have been reports of disturbances because of chain rattling." And the ghost behind the wheel says, "So you're picking me out because I'm a ghost?" And sure enough, there's a gas station attendant in the background rattling chains and making all kinds of noises. But in effect, the storyline and the humor associated in the African American community drove a very, very significant response and resonance. And other ads that similarly ran humorous lines did well as well. And then finally, and maybe the one that's most powerful, at least in terms of broad brand influence, is in the Hispanic community and the notion of family. Anything that piques family interest resonates incredibly well. And for us, and frankly, the ad that indexed as high as anything we've seen was an ad for the Keebler fudge strip with, these are two little girls who come into a home, they pull out the package of cookies and there's only one left. There's a little girl and a little bigger girl, and the little girl looks up with big wide eyes and sort of, boy, I hope she gives it to me. And sure enough, she does. And then the bigger girl turns around and there's another cookie in the package. At any rate, that ad scored incredibly well, and when discussed and interviewed, that notion of family in the Hispanic community, regardless of whether there's a Hispanic present in the ad itself, is an enormously important message. So we did follow these things through, and we did ask ourselves whether resonance in the ad actually resulted in any lift in terms of purchase. And sure enough, in the Keebler case, and in all cases, the correlation is very, very significant. But in Keebler, during the specific periods at which they ran those ads in very discrete and high-density Hispanic communities, there was a sales lift for Kellogg in that particular product of 41%. And they did it 2 years in a row, and you sort of wonder why they don't run that thing year-round. But nevertheless, very, very significant correlation throughout. So this study for us opened a lot of eyes. What's interesting is that we're not aware of a lot of studies that go on this front. We just aren't, which is why we launched it. And again, our premise is quite simple, that if multinational interests in the countries that they reside just would take a hard look at the multicultural change that's occurring before them, down the street from them, and tailor marketing programs and tailor products to go after those specific interests, that the stakes are huge and the opportunities are huge. And that if you were going to wrap yourself around one axle, that would be an appropriate axle to do it with. So, you know, in this country, we're talking about $3 trillion of market opportunity that's wrapped around just those three multicultural dimensions. These, of course, compare and scale to some very significant economic interests around the world. And the point I made earlier is we've just begun this here in the U.S. because we're U.S.-centric. But my belief is that in every country, with immigration going the way it's going, the multicultural dimension of marketing is going to take on a significant prevalence. So anyway, this is really the message I wanted to give to you. I know I had more time. I'm happy to take questions on any subject that you would like to talk to me about across Watch and Buy. But again, my hope is that I might have inspired at least a few folks to think harder about how to organize and how to build an effective multicultural campaign. I have a question right up front here.
Hi, my name is Paula Rosenblum, and I'm with Retail Systems Research.
Yep.
I live in Miami, and the one thing that gets really apparent when you live in Miami is that Hispanics are not such a homogeneous group.
Yes.
And that, in fact, Cubans and Venezuelans are very different, and certainly Puerto Ricans are very different. And so I guess my question to you is it granular enough to just look at Hispanics as a whole?
My answer would be yes and no. So Hispanics are
Thank
no
you, that was
different.
really clear.
They're no different than the folks that I can basically see represented here in this room. The differences that exist inside any community, multicultural community, are significant. There's no question. Languages are different, different dialects, different things, but there is still some very significant interests that they do have in common that are unique and different than what we typically build our marketing messages around, which tend to be still Caucasian-centric. And so if we can garner them, like family, it really does run across the spectrum in the Hispanic community. Now, there are more differences, and my guess is, as you run down the retail spectrum, those that have very, very distinct and specific requirements in a zip code know exactly what they are. How you align marketing messages to attach to that is going to have to be a local response as opposed to the national response. But in my view, there is a national response that can be played in these big multicultural segments that can be very effective.
I just have one other question. If you then slice that by age band, and one thing that the media tends to be very loose about is assuming that baby boomers are one large mass, when in fact we're all pretty different. There's probably 4 or 5 or 6 different groups. Is the cultural heritage more important than age bands, or how do you cross-tabulate them together?
On the subject that I've conveyed around broad messaging, not so important. But needless to say, as you break down specific marketing objectives, you will find significant differences. I was holding my breath a little bit in the discussion around millennials on Connected. Truth is, the biggest phenomena going on isn't about millennials being connected, right? It's in the older generations. All the big change dynamics today are how empowered the older generation is on the subject of being connected. So it's very interesting, how that plays out. But I think for the broad campaigns and the messaging, and so much money is spent on big national campaigns, there's still an awful lot of upside, I think, if you get that multicultural dimension. I can't see a thing, so.
You're right.
Yep, okay.
Good morning. My name is Felipe Garcia. I'm with the Vamos a Tucson group. We help local retailers access international shoppers and change cultural aspects about their operations. And my question has to do with, I completely agree with what we're seeing in the U.S. about diversity, but what about international visitors? Have you reached them, tracked them? In 2010, there were 1 billion international travels worldwide. It's expected in 20 years we'll have 1.8 billion international travelers, and they're coming especially to the U.S. to shop. How are we reaching them? Is your company tracking how to access that visitor coming here?
I would hate to act particularly informed on that one. I'm well aware of in Asia, it's been going on forever, right? The Japanese used to shop every other locale across Southeast Asia, go get their bargains. They used to fly literally 747s to go in. Everyone would go in, spend as much money as they could, largely because of currency. And we see those big things. But I don't know the dynamics necessarily around what they buy and what those attributes would be. My guess is Terry and the Macy's crowd would have a pretty good feel for what the international crowd does in their space, clearly being a big dominant and big player in New York City, where you see lots of those ebbs and flows. And my guess is it's a metro phenomena for the most part at this stage. But it's a great question. We just don't have lots of data on the subject. Anything else? Okay, I think we're good. Thank you very much.
You're all glued to your seats. That's great. We're going to take a break now outside and return at 11 o'clock, so we're running a little early, so thank you. Come back a little early.